everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Today I'm sharing 3 simple ways that you can use your scrapbook.com pops of color on floral cards. The 3 cards I'm making today can be made using any color of cardstock, pattern paper, and pops of color that you own. I will be using the sherbet cardstock and peppermint cardstock packs today. The pops of color I'll be using on all my projects is called Dusty Rose in a gloss. I'm also going to be using this Flower Fields stamp set, Buttercup stencil, Celebrate Expression stamp set, and the Modern Alphabet dies, along with a few other supplies I have in my collection. I'll list all of the items I used today in the description below. I'm going to start by showing you how to create a simple card front with a swipe of pops of color. This is a really easy way to use these liquid embellishments. I have placed my cardstock onto a silicone mat, and I'm going to add a little bit of liquid to my scraper. Then I'm going to swipe the color across the cardstock. If you want more color, you could add more liquid. I like to swipe the scraper in a few different directions to get a brushed look. You could also mix multiple colors together to create an ombre look. After it had dried, I used the nested hearts to cut out a shape from the Dusty Rose piece and a piece of vellum. I'm going to use some mint tape to hold the dies in place, and then I'll go run this through my die cut machine. While I have my die cut machine out, I'm also going to cut out the sentiment for this card. I'm going to spell the word hello using the dies. I'm going to cut out 4 of each of these letters so that I can stack them together and create a thicker sentiment. To save a little bit of time, I did fold that cardstock in half so that I could cut 2 at a time. For the background, I'm going to stamp a random floral pattern using the Flower Fields stamp set. Now, I am all about saving time when I create my projects. So instead of stamping each of these flowers individually, I've just laid out the pattern of florals onto a stamping block, and then I'm going to stamp this design all at once onto my cardstock. Once the stamps are inked, it's going to be easier for you to see all the images selected and how I place them on that acrylic block. Some of these are larger florals, others are just little buds, and some are leaf shapes. I'm going to stamp this design a few times onto some white cardstock using black ink. As I'm stamping, I am rotating the block so that it looks a bit more random. To stamp the edges, I'll just ink up some portions of the stamp, and then I'll stamp those designs off the edge. Now, while I finish stamping this, I would love it if you tapped that subscribe button. And if you're enjoying today's video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. Please let me know in the description below that you are a new viewer so that I can welcome you. Once the background was complete, I started to assemble the card. I've already placed this down onto a deep blue card base, and then I've glued all of those letters together to create a thicker die cut. I did want to add a little bit of dimension to the card, so I used the heart die to cut out a shape from a foam adhesive sheet. This allows me to pop up that center on the vellum. This card is super easy to assemble. You can change the colors and the sentiment to anything you like. I kept it really simple using the word hello because I have someone in mind that I want to send this to. Now, you may have noticed that I'm using a clear mat to help me get these letters straight. I laid them out onto the card, then placed the sticky side of the mat onto the letters and used the grid to make sure everything was straight. This is a little trick that I learned from one of scrapbook.com's live streams, and it's such a great tip. Once the letters were lined up, I just added a little adhesive and used the mat to transfer them over. I'm going to let these sit a minute so that the glue sets, and then I'll remove the mat. All right, now our first card is complete with that pops of color heart in the center. How simple was that? This is just one way that you can use your pops of color. Another way that you can use pops of color is with a stencil. Again, I have placed cardstock onto my silicone mat, and I'm going to lay the buttercup stencil over the top. I'm going to fill in the stencil with some of the Dusty Rose liquid pops of color. Now, if you wanted to, you could use just the pops of color for this, but I like to mix it with transparent texture paste. Mixing it with the paste does soften the color a little bit and lessen the shine of the pops of color, but it does allow me to use less of that pops of color liquid in my design. Once I'm done completing this card, I will share the same card I created where I used just pops of color without texture paste so that you can see the comparison. Once I had filled in all of the design, I carefully removed the stencil and set it aside to dry. While that paste is drying, I'm going to do a little bit of stamping for this card. On the front of this card, I'm going to add a circle with some floral images. I've cut this circle out from white cardstock using the nested circle dies, and I'm going to use a stamping platform to add my images. I'm starting with 2 large florals, and then I'm going to continue to add more flowers until I get the design I like. Once again, I am using a clear mat. This time, it has been placed on my stamping platform to help hold that circle in place. When I have shapes like this that I need to stamp on, I can't always use the magnets on my platform, so this sticky mat comes in handy. All right, now I have all of the florals stamped onto the circle, and I'm going to stamp a sentiment. This is a simple congratulations sentiment from that Celebrate Expressions stamp set. I'm just going to add this to a strip of cardstock, and then I'll show you how to assemble the card. I have already attached that stenciled background and sentiment to the card. I have also attached some floral dies around the back of the circle, and I added some stitching. I'm just going to pop this down onto the card, add a little bow, and decorate it with some enamel dots. This is such a simple card to make using those pops of color in the background. Before I move on to the last project, I want to show you what this card would have looked like if I had just used pops of color. It does take quite a bit more liquid, but you can see that it is much glossier and has a richer hue. I had to use about 1/3 of the bottle to fill all of this stencil in, which is why I like mixing it with paste. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our final card design. For this card, I'm going to start by creating the background using the floral stamps. I have 3 of these that I have placed onto my stamping platform, and I'm going to start stamping from the far right and move my way to the left. Now, this is a really easy way to make a design that repeats itself. Every time I move the cardstock, I'm just going to check real quick that the flowers are aligned and spaced correctly, and then I'll add the ink and stamp some more images. With this method, I don't need to move the stamps, just the cardstock. When I get to the end, I'm going to remove the 2 smaller stamps so that I can end with the largest floral. Now I'm going to cut this to an A2 size card and show you another way to use pops of color. The method I'm going to show you is the most common way to use pops of color. We're just going to create some little dots at the top of each of the flowers. I like to start by practicing on a scrap piece of paper first, just to make sure that my liquid is flowing and I have my pressure right. I'm going to add some little dots to the tips of the florals. They are going to be small and a bit pointy, but once I tap the bottom of the cardstock, they flatten out. This is a simple way to get those perfectly round dots on your project. Your dots don't need to all be the same size for these. Flowers and flower buds are often different sizes, which makes this a great starter project if you are new to using pops of color. Now I'm going to set this card base aside to dry for about 20 minutes. I'll finish assembling the card off camera, and then we'll talk about all 3 designs we made today. Now here is that last card. I did finish it up off camera by adding some ink around the edges, and then I backed it with a soft green cardstock. Now all 3 of these cards are very simple designs that you can create using your cardstock and pops of color. Today I showed you some tips for adding pops of color dots, how to use pops of color with a stencil, and how to do a simple swish of color with a glossy finish. I'm going to share some photos of all 3 of these cards so that you can see them in a little bit more detail. I truly enjoy sharing ways that you can use supplies that you own. We all have items in our collection like pops of color and cardstock that need using, and these 3 techniques are some that I hope you try. If you're one who enjoys pinning photos to inspiration boards, I have added still shots of these projects to my scrapbook.com gallery and on my website for you to use. If you have any questions about this project or the supplies listed in the description below, feel free to leave me a comment. I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.